When you drive up to eastern Canada's Le Massif, you know it's something truly special. Boasting spectacular views, distinctive terrain, and one of the biggest footprints in the region, Le Massif de Charlevoix is possibly the East's closest thing to a true North American destination experience. Despite snow totals that pale to those of most Western resorts, Le Massif's one-of-a-kind topography makes for an experience that some might call travel-worthy in its own right. So how does Le Massif stack up as an overall package? Well, in this video, we'll go through Le Massif de Charlevoix's overall mountain experience, and then we'll go through how the resort stacks up in our overall rankings. Let's jump right into it. The first thing that stands out about Le Massif is its looks. With spectacular views of the St. Lawrence River, we'd argue Le Massif is one of the most beautiful ski resorts in the entirety of the East Coast, if not all of North America. This vibe isn't something that any other resort east of the Mississippi can come close to embodying. Not only does a trip to Le Massif provide the surreal experience of seemingly skiing or riding into a body of water, but unlike certain other resorts with nearby lakes, the continuous movement of the river provides a one-of-a-kind backdrop that's hard to truly appreciate unless you see it for yourself. Aside from the tucked-away bunny hill by the Club Med, nowhere at the resort feels built up or developed, and most guests will find their skiing or riding experience to feel isolated and naturalistic. For the adventurous, the 15-minute hike to the top of the unique Hors-Piste zone will give you a 25-foot high panorama of the whole resort that's truly breathtaking. It's also worth noting that under its current layout, Le Massif is a rare upside-down ski resort, with the main base area actually being at the top of the mountain rather than the bottom. This means that you get to appreciate the amazing views in all their glory as soon as you strap on your skis or board. With a 406-acre skiable footprint within the official bounds of the resort, Le Massif de Charlevoix is a modestly sized resort for the East Coast on paper. However, the resort calls home to an impressive 2,526-foot vertical drop, which is up there with the best on the East Coast. The resort also boasts a sizable so-called hors-piste area to the skiers left of the official boundary, with over 160 skiable acres of unpatrolled terrain available to explore. If inclusive of this off-piste terrain area, Le Massif offers a skiable footprint of over 560 acres in size, putting it on the upper end of mountains east of the Mississippi. Beginner terrain at Le Massif isn't exactly the most outstanding experience, although there are some notable positives. The gondola, B-chair, and D-chair all serve green-rated runs, but they are very limited in nature, with only 1 to 2 routes in most places, and they can get crowded. But while Le Massif's easier runs are limited in quantity, the resort does offer top-to-bottom green terrain, making for the longest possible vertical descent on a beginner slope east of the Mississippi. For those who don't want runs that long, guests can load back up the resort at mid-mountain via the D-chair or gondola mid-station. Le Massif does have a few options for those who are truly first-timers. At the bottom of the resort, guests will find a well-sheltered bunny hill area. This zone overlooks the Club Med resort, which is an ideal location for those with the means looking for a ski-in, ski-out luxury beginner experience. This location is also highly sheltered, keeping beginners safe from higher speed traffic. But due to Le Massif's inverted layout, most guests will begin their day near the summit, quite far from this lower beginner zone, making this learning area impractical for all but those staying at the Club Med. But on the other hand, near the Summit Lodge is a secondary bunny hill that's even more sheltered. This high elevation zone offers spectacular views and excellent snow preservation for a beginner zone. It also features a miniature progression terrain park for beginner and intermediate park enthusiasts looking to practice small jumps. This all being said, this zone does come with a significant drawback for less experienced skiers and riders. It's served solely by a Poma lift, a surface lift that many beginners find challenging and frustrating. At least skiers and riders in this zone can take comfort knowing that the surface lift is keeping them safe from the high winds, which frequently occur at this high resort elevation. When it comes to intermediate terrain, blues at Le Massif are comparable in design to the trails one would find at many destination resorts. Groomer skiing isn't quite the expansive experience one might find at some West Coast destinations, but grooming operations are consistent and widespread enough across the resort's sizable footprint. The blue trails off Chair D are probably the best of the resort, as they sit in a high-up terrain pod that preserves good snow and faces less south than the rest of the mountain. Notably, some low-angle blue bump runs exist at Le Massif, a rarity among East Coast ski resorts. These runs are the perfect place for intermediates to experiment in ungroomed terrain with limited consequences for mistakes. Le Massif's blue groomers are often empty and rip fast with lots of natural berms, which can be a lot of fun for those looking to ski or ride a bit more aggressively on lower consequence terrain. In addition, it's also worth noting that some of the groom's black diamonds will probably be approachable for advanced intermediate visitors. Speaking of black diamonds, advanced terrain at Le Massif is among the best in the region, especially if you like glades. Unlike many resorts elsewhere in Quebec and northern Vermont, unmarked glades at Le Massif are by and large too dense to ski without local knowledge. However, marked woods runs are widely present across the resort's footprint. These glades are cut to every level of desired density, with certain woods trails offering such a unique East Coast experience that they might feel like you're skiing in a different region entirely. Glades at Le Massif range from wide open to technical, but each woods run is cut with an attention to detail that makes every run ski with flow, and a good fall line that takes advantage of the natural movements of the terrain. You could spend all day trying different lines through the trees of a single terrain pod without ever getting bored. When it comes to advanced terrain outside of the glades, Le Massif's fully cut trails also run the gamut of fairly steep groomers to nice mid-angle bump runs that should give advanced skiers a complete and satisfying experience. Black bump runs frequently sustain a long, thigh-burning fall line, making for excellent endurance terrain. While not the toughest ski resort in the East, Le Massif is still a great choice for experts when conditions allow. Double Black Diamonds runs all have pitches that are deserving of the rating, and skiers and riders below expert level should take extreme caution when entering this level of terrain due to the exposure. Tree-defined trails of this level offer a combination of steep and protracted fall lines, making for some of the best cardio-busting ski runs one can find east of the Mississippi. When it comes to glade terrain, a particular highlight are the single and double black glades off of the D-Chair, whose high elevation preserves natural snow extremely well even when it's been a while since the last storm, and each woods line in this area commands a sustained gladed vertical almost all the way back to the lift. Many of the glades off the B-Chair are tighter than the glades off Chair D, but they boast deceptively large footprints and fly under many visitors' radar despite their central location. But despite the quality of Le Massif's inbounds lift-served terrain, none of it can compare to the true expert's wet dream, the Hors-Piste Terrain to the skier's left of the official mountain. This zone is unpatrolled and requires some mild hiking to reach, no matter which gate you choose, so we advise extreme caution before entering. But while this zone isn't patrolled, it is maintained by the resort and offers strong signage, so most visitors will find this terrain more navigable than the traditional lift-accessed backcountry at other resorts. These Hors-Piste zones, particularly the steep chutes marked Sector 1 and 2 on the map, are some of the East Coast's most extreme terrain offerings, boasting incredibly steep pitches, including paths with air over ice falls and between steep trees. Due to the nature of their access, difficulty, and sheer size, each of these zones can preserve snow for days after a storm with favorable weather, and on a powder day, they can easily offer fresh laps until your legs give out. For most expert visitors, the short 15-minute hike will likely be more than worth it, given how unmissable of an experience these zones provide. But Le Massif's expert terrain isn't perfect. The one main shortcoming is the mid and lower mountains' elevation and aspect, particularly on the looker's left side under the C-Chair. This terrain comprises the bulk of Le Massif's double black patrolled offerings and very nicely sits in its own isolated terrain pod, but it faces south and gets brutally sun-cooked when it hasn't snowed. Still though, Le Massif does have an accommodation for the issue of its near sea level elevation in lower mountain areas. A convenient mid-load station on Chair C picks up skiers and riders about halfway up the resort, allowing guests in this terrain pod to skip the long run out through slushy snow, which often plagues the bottom third of the resort. Speaking of conditions, despite its quite northerly location, Le Massif's annual snow totals fall short of most western destinations and even some East Coast competitors. In addition, much of the resort's terrain faces south, and many lower elevation zones are vulnerable to meltouts when it hasn't recently snowed. However, Le Massif's tall footprint means snow preservation up high is still quite good for the region, especially in expert zones that take far longer to ski out than one would expect at a resort of this caliber. The zones that are officially inbounds are easy to lap thanks to an intuitive lift layout. In addition, Le Massif's northern location right on the St. Lawrence River means it can catch major storms that miss just about everywhere else in the east. When it comes to resiliency, snowmaking exists in most ski resort areas, and grooming is employed to keep even the most vulnerable lower mountain areas skiable. However, since the resort bottoms out near sea level and faces south, spring-like conditions and bare spots are commonplace across the bottom third of the resort throughout the entire winter. Le Massif has an impressive lift system for the east. Almost every lift at the resort is modern and high speed, with few seeing significant lift lines out of peak periods. The main drawback is that the variability of low elevation terrain makes for a sluggish runout for those looking to lap top to bottom on the B chair and gondola, but this is avoidable with the mid-load stations on the C chair and gondola. In addition, the Summit Poma is somewhat difficult for beginners, but as we mentioned earlier, the trade-off is wind shelter for the most wind-exposed zone of the resort. And as we also mentioned earlier, the Hors-Piste sections of Le Massif are not directly lift-served and require some hiking to reach. For a major East Coast destination resort, Le Massif rarely sees serious crowding comparable to major resorts south of the Canadian border. An expansive and modern lift fleet placed sensibly to the fall lines makes it easy to lap most terrain zones, with minimal traversing required when every lift is running. The resort also limits lift ticket sales to ensure that crowds are never too terrible. On busy days, lines can sometimes build up at the gondola base in Summit Poma, but on the average day, most guests will rarely be waiting more than a few minutes for a lift, with midweek visitors regularly skiing or riding straight onto the chair even during midwinter months. Le Massif's biggest crowd flow issue arguably has to do with its lower mountain. Several trails converge into the same lower mountain runs near the bottom, which leads to congestion, especially on the green runs down there. This can be particularly annoying on weekends or holidays. But at least Le Massif's choke points are fairly straightforward to get acquainted with, thanks to a generally easy to figure out mountain layout. Signage is abundant and thorough throughout the resort's footprint, and all resort areas filter down to the same bottom area, aside from a few trails around the base of the gondola. From the bottom, the B chair takes you straight up to the Summit Lodge, so it's never too difficult to find your way back to your car despite the resort's inverted layout, as long as you aren't caught at the base when the resort closes. Even in the Hors-Piste zone, signage is present at every major junction area, making it hard to get lost despite this area's extreme isolation. However, there are a few issues. Le Massif occasionally requires some traversing to get between terrain zones, particularly getting to the looker's left terrain when the C chair isn't running. In addition, the resort's three-dimensionality makes the sizes of some areas difficult to interpret from the map, leading to some runs feeling way longer than they might appear on paper. Le Massif's eastern Canadian location means it can get cold, and the resort does offer a few options to go in and stop for a break. These lodges aren't anything truly upscale, but they're clean and placed conveniently. There are two lodges, one at the summit and one at the bottom of the resort, and thanks to the mountain's layout, it's never too difficult to find one of these lodges unless you're in the Hors-Piste. The Summit Lodge boasts incredible views and fewer crowds than the base lodge, making it arguably the best option for most visitors to stop in for a meal. Plus, with the resort's inverted layout, this Summit Lodge will be most visitors' first stop when they arrive. But regardless of which lodge you stop in, both are clean and serve their purpose, with satisfactory lodge food that, as with most Quebec resorts, is a great deal for those coming from the US. The bottom base lodge also features a creperie, which if you're a foodie, we'd highly recommend you stopping in at. When it comes to getting to Le Massif, the resort is likely the most northern ski area that will ever be on the radar of an East Coast skier or rider. The resort is a very long drive from most US metropolitan areas, sitting approximately 7 hours from Boston and a whopping 9 hours from New York City. It's even a pretty long commitment for those located in Montreal, with the drive from that city taking about 3.5 hours. Those who are willing to fly will find the resort easily accessible from Quebec City, but at that point, many vacationers will probably just prefer to go out west. Parking is mainly located at the top of the resort and is plenty expansive for the low crowds typical of a Quebec ski area. Smaller lots are also available at the bottom of the resort for those staying in the nearby town of Le Massif. Le Massif's remote location means there's little on-site lodging aside from the extremely upscale Club Med. However, the nearby town of Mont-Saint-Anne, which is about 20 to 30 minutes from the resort, features many affordable lodging options, as well as plenty of great local restaurants. Quebec City is also a short trip away, and while it's hardly a party town for those looking for nightlife, it does have a much larger social scene than anything else around Le Massif. So Le Massif isn't the biggest or most consistent ski resort snow-wise in the east, but this river-adjacent destination offers a magical experience unlike anything else within thousands of miles of it. From the low crowds and untracked expert lines to its truly otherworldly aesthetics, Le Massif is unlikely to disappoint those willing to put in the drive to get there. While more expensive than most other resorts in Quebec, Le Massif is a solid deal for those used to US destination single-day prices with today's exchange rates. This is well short of the nearly $200 US price tag of many competing resorts stateside, and both half-day tickets and 4-day bundles are also available for those looking for a better deal. And for families with younger children, guests 6 and under ski free. Le Massif is also now a member of the Mountain Collective Pass, with 2 days of flexible access included at any time during the winter season. Now let's go through how Le Massif stacks up in our overall rankings, which are determined by the following 10 category mountain score. Le Massif's annual snowfall isn't the best on the East Coast, but it's still relatively strong for the region, and the resort gets a 6 for snow. Le Massif does offer a robust snowmaking network, but its south-facing footprint and near sea level base hurt retention, getting the resort a 5 for resiliency. Le Massif offers a 560-acre skiable footprint when including the Hors-Piste section of the resort, getting it a 4 for size. Le Massif offers extensive terrain for intermediate to expert visitors, including some incredibly unique trees in its Hors-Piste, and while beginner terrain could be a little bit better, the resort still gets a 6 for terrain diversity. Le Massif isn't quite as extreme as some of the most difficult East Coast ski resorts, but there's still a fair share of very steep tree and bump runs, getting the resort a 7 for challenge. Le Massif offers a modern lift setup for the east in most parts of the resort, and the area served by the Summit Poma is really the only exception. However, over 27% of Le Massif's terrain is in the Hors-Piste, requiring some hiking to reach, and the resort gets an 8 for lifts. Le Massif can see lines on peak days, but they're nowhere near as bad as the most popular big East Coast resorts, although trail congestion can be an issue in lower mountain areas, getting the resort a 7 for crowd flow. Le Massif offers lodges at both the top and bottom of the mountain, and while they aren't the most special and spacious, the resort still gets a 6 for facilities. Le Massif's narrow and vertical layout makes it easy to get around in general, although a few flat traverses do exist, and the resort gets a 7 for navigation. And finally, mountain aesthetic. Le Massif may not be the highest elevation resort in the world, but its views of the dynamic St. Lawrence River won't be found anywhere else. There are few other ski hills east of the Mississippi with an atmosphere this awe-inspiring, and the resort gets our highest score of 10 in this category. These categories add up to an overall score of 66, making Le Massif our top peak on the East Coast by a significant margin as of early 2025. Le Massif isn't the biggest, most challenging, or fanciest ski resort in the East, but its absolutely incredible mountain aesthetic squarely distinguishes it against other regional competitors, and while south-facing slopes and a modest footprint are disadvantages, a strong lift setup and distinctive terrain help seal the deal as a one-of-a-kind East Coast choice. The real problem for Le Massif is its remoteness. Yes, many folks will find it a lot more unique than the best resorts in Vermont, Maine, and other parts of Quebec, but despite its strengths, it's still probably not as good as a typical destination ski resort in Colorado or Utah. Ultimately, besides those who live in Quebec City or northern New Hampshire or Maine, Le Massif might not be quite as appealing of a choice as hopping on a plane and going somewhere bigger and more snowsure. If you found this information helpful, be sure to like and subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss any of our content. And special thanks to our Peak patrons. For more information on Le Massif and over 100 ski resorts around the world, check out peakrankings.com. See you for the next one.